Everyone, it is 5:02, August 2nd, 2021. We do appear to have a quorum. Riva, if you would please call the roll.
Yes. Bederneth Lankella.
Aye.
Baltazar Deanna Satana. Barbara Harrington McKinney. Grant Foster.
Here.
Keith Furman.
Present.
Margaret Bergamini.
Present.
Chris McCahill. Randy Udell. And then Tom Wilson.
Present. Thank you, Riva. Thank you, Riva. We do have a quorum, so we'll call this meeting to order. Jesse, if you would please proceed with our virtual meetings opening statement.
All right. Welcome to our virtual Transportation and Policy Planning Board meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video for the purposes of quorum and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists, that is alders, committee members, and staff have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists can also rename themselves if they wish to add pronouns after their name. Please do not alter the naming convention otherwise. Also, please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the body, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. Our first item of business is approval of minutes from our June 28th, 2021 meeting. So that was just the TPPB, and our July 19th, 2021 meeting. That was the joint meeting with the Transportation Commission. Without objection, I would like to do both of those at the same time. Is there a motion to approve both sets of those minutes? Looks like Alder Furman first. Abadre, is that a second? Thank you. Is there any discussion? Abadre, I assume your hand is still up from the second, or did you have something? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes from our June 28th, 2021 and July 19th, 2021 meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes that's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that will go down as unanimous. I do not believe we have any registrants for public comment not on the agenda. So are there any communications, disclosures, or recusals from members of the board? Seeing none, we'll dive into our first item for the evening then, Legislar 6668, Director's Report.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So I'll just briefly go through what I put into Legislar. I think the first thing on the list is we do have a replacement for Dave Trowbridge, Philip Gritzmacher. He's worked with the NPO, Sun Prairie, and Denver. We're really excited to have him, and I'm just going to be honest. It's just helpful to have another person to help with what's going on. You know, we've been, I think, without Dave Trowbridge for 8 or 9 months, and so very happy for that. Transit, BRT, I think many of you already know a lot of what we've been working on. The State Street has consumed a fair amount of our time working with the consultants and with various property owners. We've also worked with the Wisconsin DOT on East Washington Avenue. Originally, the DOT had raised some concerns about some of the capacity reductions. It seems like they are more amenable to it now. They were reviewing our traffic analysis, and they'll be getting back with us. We are starting the historic or Section 106 process for the BRT. We're meeting with consulting parties, and in here I said it was mid-September, but it's actually going to be mid-August. It's going to come up in a week or so. Some of the consulting parties that have expressed concern include those in the Hill Farms neighborhood and then on State Street. You probably, or most of you are probably aware that the state budget was passed and the state budget included a 50% reduction in state aids for Metro. And so if we get to the operating budget tonight and it's not delayed, the budget that we'll show tonight reflects that. The network redesign, I think you perhaps have more information on that than I do because you saw the presentation, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, of the initial concepts. Those should be on the website this week. Transportation demand management, we're moving forward with that. Philip Gritzmacher is kind of a key person on that. We're taking, there were about 6 or 7 different, I'm going to say hard parts in our TDM ordinance that just weren't really resolved, or perhaps they provided unintended consequences that we didn't want. And so Phil's trying to resolve those right now by looking at some of the more recently adopted TDM programs, particularly the one in Denver. Parking enforcement and parking garages are pretty straightforward. It looks as though there may be a hotelier for the JDAS site. I think the Finance Committee meetings have more information on that. Vision Zero, 20 is plenty. Signs are going up either this week or next week. I've gotten 2 different reports. I was told last week that it was this week, but I've been told by Channel 3 today that it's today. So those are the 2 pilot recommendations. We have something requested in the capital budget to do the whole city next year. And so hopefully that will get approved. East Washington, speed reduction signs and continental crossings have gone up. We have, the MPD has done increased enforcement. We've done some lane reductions, and we're also exploring some other treatments that might address the problems that we're experiencing, safety problems. A lot of those problems seem to occur during off-peak, not during the rush hour. And so, so we have to look at the circumstances regarding those. Shared streets and slowed streets have gotten, I'm going to just say, implemented a little bit later than I wish they were. Various different logistical complications. However, we did get them up on South Shore Drive and also on Atwood Avenue. East Mifflin signs will probably go up this week, and then perhaps Sherman after that. Let's talk streets. We are continuing with the engagement, and there's a little bit of a summary of that. And so the Let's Talk Streets initiative is going to help feed the Vision Zero as well as the Complete Green Streets. 2 things that I neglected to put in the memo that I should have is 1, bias training RFP. We got 19 proposals for the bias training, which is much more than I think we were expecting 4 or 5, and so it may take us a couple of extra weeks to sift through the proposals and develop a recommendation. Much greater response than we were anticipating. And we also did have a quarterly meeting with Wisconsin DOT. A lot of that meeting focused on when they could do some repairs on certain streets under their jurisdiction, but one happened to deal with how can we get pedestrian treatments on the Milwaukee Street Bridge over the interstate. That bridge was recently reconstructed, and it was reconstructed without sidewalks. And it's just, when you think of the density of housing that's going on east of the interstate on Milwaukee Street, we have to come up with something. And so we've floated some interim measures that we're going to explore with them. So those are kind of the main issues. I was gone for about 12 days, but that's what I could summarize for all of you.
Thank you, Tom. We do actually have one registrant for public comment on this item, and it may be a misregistration, but the Carol Lee Mahoney Braithwaite, neither in support nor opposition, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. I'm not sure if that person was intending to register for the next item, number 3. There's an Edward Lee on our attendees list, but I'm going to assume that, is there a Carol Lee Mahoney Braithwaite there?
Not in attendance currently, and Edward Lee is has registered for item 4.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Jesse. All right, then, and the registrant did not wish to speak in any case. So, all right, questions for Tom on the report? Director's report? Seeing none, thank you, Tom. We will then move to the next item, Legistar 66771, Metro Fair study presentation by Justin.
I am.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. The fair public hearing was advertised as being at 6 o'clock, which means I don't believe we can really take up the registrants for that before then. So I wonder if someone might want to move taking some items out of order in the agenda and get some of the other items taken care of before the fair study.
Alder Foster?
Yeah, I would move to take up item 5 next.
Is there a second? Second by Badri. All those in favor of moving up item number 6, adopting the traffic calming final report to next, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous.
I'm okay with that, but that wasn't my motion. But I don't care if it's 5 or 6. I had moved item.
Oh, did I mishear you? Okay.
Yeah, I moved item 5. I think that's when we have some members of the public that wanted to comment on. So if 5 works, we should probably do that one.
Okay. Without objection, we'll do 5. I misheard Alder Foster. All right. Seeing no objections, we'll start with 5. Legislar 66450, accepting the parking study and final parking count determination for the Village on Park.
Okay, I think we have Jeff Greger here as well as Dan Rolfs, and I'm not quite sure how this will move forward. Dan, will you provide a brief summary of what's before us, or will that be Jeff Greger?
Discretion of the commission, I can provide a brief presentation on what's before you.
Okay, great.
Is that acceptable?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Please go ahead.
Okay. Let me grab my screen here. All right, go. Try to share my screen and make sure this works for folks. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, just wanted to make sure. I'll move this along. We've got a fairly brief presentation. Hopefully it's just to kind of give you an overview of where things are at. I took out any song and dance, but there is a haiku in there. If you find it, raise your hand, you get a prize. Just a quick overview of the study, the parking study that was completed at the Village on Park. So you hopefully had a chance to review it, but just to kind of give you a brief summary, the real goals here that the parking study was looking at were to create the development pads for the Urban League and the CBA affordable housing and provide sufficient parking for more intense, dense land uses on the site, and then providing some additional amenities for the site, public art, gathering spaces, and then increasing connectivity. And one of the last things, but a critically important item, is to improve site and regional stormwater. There's some real challenges in the site. Hopefully this redevelopment can incorporate some improvements to that as well. So the financing structure that's going to be in play here is that the Urban League would own and develop and manage the Black Business Hub building that I'm guessing most of, if not all of you, are aware of. And then the CDA would own and develop the Village on Park, as well as any parking, common areas, and potentially an affordable housing site as well. The CDA would then pay for the parking and site improvements with TIF funds. This is a mix of cash and borrowing, utilizing the half-mile rule for TID 42. And for those of you who know me in my other part of my job, I can talk about this at length because it's exciting. So just a quick overview of the site, so we're all on the same page. North is to your right, where Access Community Health is up on the northeast corner. The ULGM Urban League Hub lot is on the southeast corner. And then we've got the north building highlighted. We'll do some other work there. So existing conditions right now, we've got just short of 191,000 square feet of buildings with 357 parking stalls and a 1.9 stall per thousand metric of stalls on the site. Some of the major feedback that we've heard well before the pandemic and continuing is a lack of parking during peak hours. This is particularly critical in, well, quite frankly, all uses, but we've heard it most loudly from Access Health and the library users as well. It's also become a de facto park and ride for many people. And you'll note Access Community Health continues to lease 25 off-site stalls to meet their demand. The proposed conditions are adding about 40% more space to get to about 272,000 square feet of buildings. We'll kind of show you the site plans as they move along through 4 separate phases, and then building an additional 369 stalls plus or minus a few in a structured ramp to get from a 1.9 parking stalls per thousand to 2.3. The other factors that we've got here is, as a noted, Access wants to get more stalls, but they also would like to expand their clinic. And Access and Madison College have both expressed interest in leasing or sharing additional parking stalls at the Village on Park. So we'll just walk through a few of the phasing here to give folks an idea of what we're talking about. So the first phase is the removal of the north building and the construction of a surface parking lot that you see here on the slide. The next phase is the construction of the parking ramp here on the southwest corner, adjacent to the UWA grocery store and the new Urban League Black Business Hub, which is on the southeast corner. This is approximately 65,000 square feet of commercial and retail and office space that the Urban League is very excited about. They can talk to you at length about that. And then phase 3 is the construction of an affordable housing project at the northwest corner of the Village on Park. This would take the place of what is right now surface parking, as would, quite frankly, the parking structure and the Urban League Hub. So all of these pieces of phase 2 and 3 eliminate surface parking and replace them with either a more intense use for commercial or residential, or some additional parking stalls. Essentially what we're doing here is freeing up development pads by constructing a parking structure to not only replace the stalls that we're removing, but to allow more dense uses to occur, specifically the hub and the affordable housing site. The last phase, phase 4, is the construction of Buick Street extension. You can see right here that removes additional parking stalls that would go on into the west and across over to, I believe it's Cypress. So one last point to bring it forward here is in the parking study, there are some additional sort of alternate scenarios with other iterations. And the first iteration that's discussed really doesn't allow for all the uses to coexist on site and deliver sufficient parking. So in this scenario, we're down to almost 1.1 stall per thousand, which is much, much lower than exists right now. And we know from work that's been done by TE, the Department of Transportation, and comments from the existing users of the Village on Park that this would create an enormous problem to actually leasing the space that's there and meeting the needs of the tenants at the Village on Park. And the same goes for the second scenario that's outlined here as well. It doesn't solve existing tenant problems, nor does it allow for additional expansion. And the city has had a long-standing policy of looking for more dense uses of sites in and around the city. So the redevelopment of this site will require additional parking, and this four-phase approach, we believe, will actually achieve that and make better use of the land instead of having a sea of surface parking, which I think none of us really want to see on that site. So that's just a brief overview. Happy to answer any questions, and I believe as noted by Mr. Lynch, there are several other folks here, Jim Whitney, Jeff Greger, Dane Johns, and Matt Walker will be close behind as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Dan. A quick question for you, just so that I understand. It seems that one of the tenant concerns, and I assume visitor concerns, has been the proximity of parking to sites that people are visiting. So I just want to make sure that I understand the location of the parking garage and how those concerns would be addressed. I assume that a lot of those concerns would come from the clinic, perhaps, but that's an assumption.
To that point, we have heard concerns from Access Community Health that they have had quite a bit of challenges getting folks to appointments on time, simply because they've either had to drive around to find a space, or they have, let's say, mobility issues, getting from wherever they are, whether it's a car or something else, to the clinic site itself. So that is definitely a challenge. We're hopeful that with the construction of the ramp, that it will provide a space that has options for folks that are using the Village on Park. So instead of driving around and trying to find something in the lot, on the street, in the neighborhood, there's a place where you can go to and find a stall. Even if it's on the third level, you still know you can go there versus hunting around a little more for a stall that will allow you to park and go to whatever appointment you may have. And I think that will carry forward with the other users of the hub and the Village on Park as well. The hub has some users that they believe will have 100 users or more a day in and out of their tenant space. And it'll be critical to have a place where folks know they can go, park, get to their place, and come back and move.
Okay, so that's just so that I understand the diagram, the map that you showed. It looked like the parking ramp was planned for the southwest kind of quadrant of the parcel, and access is on the northeast side of the parcel.
That's correct.
And there's some surface parking around access. So is the idea to dedicate that surface parking specifically to access, or simply say, okay, access patients, you're going to park over on that corner of the lot and your appointment is on the other corner of the lot, and make sure there are, accessible walkways, etc.
I believe that's part of it. You are correct that access is on the northeast and the ramp would be in the southwest. Access does own their parcel, so if they can move their their employees and anyone else there to another site, they would then have space, or more space, I should say, for their patients.
Okay, so essentially the surface parking would be reserved for people who are coming in and out for appointments.
I believe so. We have not talked with Access how they would structure that yet. And to that point, we have not secured any agreements with Access about actually securing space in the ramp. We need to obviously have this conversation with you all and the balance of policymakers to understand what would be potentially feasible, if anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. When I was reading the report, I was hoping to see something speaking to the current utilization and demand, and the only thing I saw repeated a few times is just the sort of the narrative of people having a hard time finding a place to park, and you brought that up again tonight. Was there any work done by the consultant to actually analyze current or historic parking utilization and demand on the site?
I can take that, or I can also defer to Matt Walker if you want to take that.
It's like Tom and Matt's hand went up when I asked the question.
So I apologize for being late. I was in a meeting with Centro Hispano, who was looking to do a significant expansion of their space right across the street from Village on Park. So we shared with the consultants some of the historic satellite photos from pre-COVID showing the utilization rate in the high 70s on the site. So they're aware of that, and they also just talked to a number of residents to get a sense of their parking needs.
So no new information since the satellite photos that were shared by Tom at our previous discussion on this.
Correct. So So anything more recent, we've had significant shutdown. Also, in recent years, we've had our major tenant, which is Madison College, move out. We had to renovate their space. UW has moved in, but they haven't started operations yet fully. So that's a little bit in flux. So it's a little hard to know exactly what that change will sort of drive because they're not up and running yet.
Sure. And maybe this is a good follow-up question for you, Matt. I didn't see anybody from planning division, but it seems like basically the basis of the study seems to be really focused on the parking minimums and maximums in our zoning code. Is that a good understanding of kind of how the primary analysis was done, or is there something I missed?
So we really pushed the consultant to we made it very clear the goal is to have sort of as little parking as possible to make the site function and solve the problems. So they started with, I think, a mental framework of if this was a typical development, what would we be looking at for parking? And then what are all the mitigating circumstances that we can start to pull that number down, understanding the users that we have, understanding the context of being by the South Transfer Point, being embedded in a community, all those things. And that's where they landed on what they thought was the correct ratio to solve those. So I think if we were new construction, maybe I think the site's 4 per 1,000 or something like that. And so I think they did everything. They took every factor into context to see how much you can push that down and still sort of solve our parking issues. Does that make sense? That's sort of how Larry described it to me, I think.
And that was just sort of in their calculating phases, but you don't have any more details on sort of what approach they took to come up with the recommended value.
I know that they look at the specific users that we have, and sort of the shift that's also happening is that we're the north building, as we get rid of that's a building that is big, but doesn't probably generate a whole lot of demand because it's a daycare and storage. And what we're replacing with is, the hub, which is, office, retail, much more intensive use. So that kind of went into the math as well, sort of how that shift is happening in users on site.
And you can answer this if you have something for, otherwise it might be for Tom Lynch, but I'm curious about, this is definitely, it's not a just plug and play. We're trying to predict the future and there's a lot of variables at play here, but I'm curious about what other cities, particularly other kind of, progressive cities that are really trying to push the boundaries on their transportation policy, really trying to minimize parking and shift towards transit and other transportation modes. Is there something that we can look towards in terms of these ratios and see where they fit in the context of what other, especially progressive cities, are doing?
I'm going to leave that to Tom. That does sound much more up his alley than mine.
That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that. I do know that other cities are eliminating parking minimums, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're proposing developments that are have no parking. We reviewed the development in light of our current TDM plans and determined kind of what would be required for this. And then there's, Matt Wachter might be able to also discuss the extension of Buick Street and the provision of the ratios, between the phases. So I can't answer that right now.
So I did a little search earlier today and saw, I think like in Portland, I think they've instituted a 3 per 1,000 square foot maximum for scenarios like this, mixed use developments. Does that, you don't know if that's correct or if there are I'm just trying to get some kind of framing.
Yeah, all right. I suspect that this is less than 3 per 1,000. We were working on a kind of a ratio basis of 2 per 1,000 or 1 per 500. I could, I have a spreadsheet where I could calculate this in the next 20 minutes, but I don't think.
Well, the study's got them in there. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
It seems like the study was primarily using the Madison zoning code minimums and maximums, which, I don't think we have any specifically from zoning planning here, but the report says this is the recommended range per our zoning code, but in reality, CC zoning code has 0 parking minimums. So it's sort of it's a weird thing where mixed use buildings will have a minimum, but then those don't actually come into effect. So I'm just trying to get if we could use that, but I don't know when those were even created. And we haven't really, I think, put a lot of attention into those for a long time because we basically have exempted everybody from the minimums. So it seems like maybe that's not a great standard to be aiming for. So I was trying to get a sense of if other cities have done more recent work and what a good goal would be in terms of maximum if you're trying to move progressive transportation policy.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. So, right now we're reviewing our TDM program, not so much in light of the minimums and maximums, but more in how to make it perhaps more effective. But I know that you're interested in removing the minimums and perhaps ratcheting down the maximums. We just haven't necessarily gone there yet.
One other detailed question, maybe Matt or somebody that was more in the weeds on the study. For the phase 3, when we're talking about the affordable housing, it sounds like the idea there is obviously we would lose some additional surface parking, but then I believe the concept is to create, I think about 40 to 50 structured parking stalls to serve that affordable housing unit. I didn't see those added into the calculations in that phase 3. I see the loss of the surface parking, but I don't see any increase in the structured stalls. can somebody speak to how those calculations were done and if there's errors there or what's going on with that?
I remember talking about it, but I'll be honest, I don't remember how they did it in the calculation. I think the truth is that, we could very well look at reducing that number and doing more shared parking type, with the housing. I think we're open to that. It's so conceptual at this point, but I don't have an answer as to where exactly those parking numbers fall, or if they were left out for some reason because they're not under control of Village on Park at that point. They're under control of the LLC that'll own the housing. But we can look into that.
Yeah, I think the square footage of the housing is being added in terms of the calculations and the ratios. So I think it would make sense to either have it all in or all out. And the reason I think it's kind of relevant is even though that's sort of a further phase out and, subject to tweaking, I get the sense that that's really driving the recommendation around the sizing of the parking. We see basically it looks like the recommendation is to kind of overbuild with the garage in phase 2, considering some of the additional losses of parking in phases 3 or 4. So if those aren't accurate, then there's a risk that we're overbuilding in phase 2.
So if you look at in the study, page 5, there's very tiny tables underneath the map. There might be bigger in some other version, but that does include parking numbers for the housing in it. But just sort of your larger point about how the housing is driving the project or not, the housing on the site has been a very clear message from the CDA board that they want to see. Their mission, the primary mission, is to deliver affordable housing. So having affordable housing on the site is something that they've been clear from day one that they want to have as part of it. Urban League, similarly, when they set out to create the hub, have always been looking to have an opportunity for affordable housing or workforce housing to sort of line up with their job training and economic development programs that are going to happen here. So those pieces have always been links. But yes, the way that we are going to fund the affordable housing, all these sort of things, kind of make it want to be its own parcel because of the way that the tax credit financing structure is going to work, and the possibility that we would move other federal funding. So public housing, Section 8, there's a bunch of things that kind of drive it to want to be its own thing. And I think Tom kind of alluded to this. I think the phasing is conservative because we're sort of thinking we need to do this relatively sequentially, let dust settle before we move on to the next thing. But I think that we could realistically try to move up those phase 3 and phase 4. So we're not waiting so long. So we're in the planning stages for that housing, kind of as soon as we know what the parcel is going to be, and moving up the section of Buick Street that falls, that basically we control because it's on our parcel, and maybe do that piece first before the rest of the Buick Street extension happens. So we can make those things more real and make them happen faster if that's the sort of the desire of the body and of the CEA.
Yeah, I'm all for affordable housing. That sounds like a great project there. I'm wondering if it might be helpful to even get a sort of a pull that section of the lot out. That as well as the road extension, which it would be great to hear a little bit more about that. But assuming that is going to happen, it might be really helpful to just kind of even assume all of that is sort of its own thing then, because in some ways the parking that's up in that northwest corner, it's not really going to serve very well the business hub or stuff down there anyway. So it might help just kind of tighten up those numbers around here's the parking, because you've already carved out access, maybe carve out that other part as well and say, okay, let's just look at it for everything, south of the proposed extension. And I guess why I'm trying to really speak to that is, I think it's really critical that we don't overbuild. And that was one of the charge you gave the consultant, right? And to me, it feels like there's a risk that we sort of pad it and say, okay, well, we can go up to 6.5 stories. This is kind of the max we can do. Let's do it, because if we play everything out at the end, it looks like that might be helpful. And I think that's really risky, particularly for structured parking that I also don't understand how we're going to charge for it. So I think it's just really, I want to make sure that we're really walking that line as close as we can.
Yep, I get it. And especially you look at the table, and if we sort of stall out at phase 2, we're at this higher parking ratio than you want. And so, so I think you're right. Like everything north of Buick kind of eventually becomes its own thing. Right. But we need to make some credible commitments to making sure that those future phases happen. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But as far as the parking analysis goes, I mean, and also given the alternative that was, the potential that Access might want to expand, and then there's a second structured parking facility on that side of the block. I mean, it makes sense, I think, to just carve all of that out and really focus this analysis around the business hub, the rest of the mall, and the library area. And that will, I think, hopefully give us a really clear sense of how much parking is going to serve those areas there. Thank you.
All right, Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My question really kind of goes back to the inference of possible overbuilding and sizability and the future plan. In the parking study, what was, and I'm going to throw those questions out, and whoever chooses to answer them, please do that. In the parking study, did the consultants survey the current daily users? I'm really talking about the offices that use the parking. So was there an analysis and contact? I know that you talked with the library, but other businesses, agencies that use that parking structure in order to come up with a workable number of parking stalls. I have several questions, so I'm going to just stop and have someone to speak to that, and then I'll go to my next questions.
No, there was not a formal survey, and I think part of that was we're in a weird time, and so like getting at our typical, kind of transient user of the parking was a little bit more difficult. So we ended up having conversations with more representatives of the organizations rather than doing a broad survey.
Okay. And specifically why I asked that question is that I worked in one of the agencies for a 10-year period. So really having a first-hand understanding of the parking limitations. And it was mentioned Access Community Health. And so what I'm finding, or what the reality of it is that individuals who had an agency housed in the atrium, or an agency housed in that area, if they could not find a parking space, I mean, they, would go over to Access Community and taking some of those parking spaces as well. And so I was really looking for the functionality. I know that there were aerial views of absence of parking during the pandemic. That is absolutely not a great indicator of what the necessity of having that parking is. And as I said, for 10 years, I navigated trying to find a parking space. And even with Madison College, before it expanded, right now it still is a challenge with parking. But even when Madison College was housed within the atrium, there was always such an absence of parking. And so I want to stay on looking at what is working for that area of Madison. I know that we can do comparisons of other cities and trying to get the right mix. But what I don't want to lose is that before the business hub was even constructed, before the housing component was added on, it was a nightmare really to find parking for that Villager Mall area. And so I just want to make sure that that is included, that workability was not there prior to all of this recent development and conversation. And so to look at the BRT and to look at all of those new things that are coming up, the reality of is that the sizability and the access to parking at that Villager Mall atrium location was totally insufficient. So 10 years ago, if that challenge existed, absolutely, as we are looking at building and expanding in that area, that still is the case. And so I don't want that lost. And so that's why I want to, that's why I asked the question, was there any survey done of current participants or current organizations that are using and would use and have access to that expanded parking.
Tom, I see your hand up. Go ahead. Looks like it maybe wasn't up on purpose.
Actually, I just saw, I think there is a member of the consultant project team that is like to access.
Oh.
And so that person might be able to answer some of these questions. His name is Larry, I think Barton, and I'm trying.
Yeah, I saw his hand up there. Okay, he just got moved over to.
Okay, there we are. So that's what I wanted to do, and I.
Thank you, Tom.
I made the connection. Okay.
Go ahead, Larry.
Hi, thanks.
Welcome.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure out how to get in. I appreciate those last comments, actually. So we have a very long history with that Villager site all the way back to when it was originally master planned. And I've had personal experience just observing it going to and from that site over the last decade. And so not only just the comparisons against zoning requirements in Madison that we did use as a benchmark, but I think we've got empirical evidence about how parking has been a problem on that site from really for the last decade. In addition to also really exploring the opportunities to advance other applications like different types of transportation, either through biking and walking and bus transportation and taxi services and all of the other tools that you use to drive down parking in these urban environments. But we did place a lot of weight in our final recommendations on that current parking ratio of 1.9. And 1.9 through our just years of observation certainly appeared to be insufficient for that site and needed to be improved upon. And that's a site that really hasn't even been 100% activated yet. That's a site that's been successful, but not peak successful at this point in time. With the housing project, with the hub that's being developed on that site, we would expect that site to actually increase in peak utilization, even beyond its current utilization. As a consulting firm, we were very uncomfortable not improving the current situation at least a little bit. And where we landed was at a 2.3 ratio, taking into account the current users on site as well as the new users coming onto the site, and as well as some of the expressed needs of the new users coming on site from those tenants and so forth. So I really feel that if anything, a higher ratio would be appreciated by a lot of people on that site. But 2.3 seemed to be the ratio that would hold up through multiple phases of this project development. In earlier phases, the parking ratios would be a little more relaxed and you'd have more, but on ultimate build out with the housing project, that's where it finally zeroes in on that last 2.3% long-term ratio. I would say that there's a lot of things that could happen between now and that final phase of construction, which might be 5 to 10 years down the road before everything gets fully built out. There are continued efforts that one could make to continue to encourage other methods of transportation and access to that site. But ultimately, we felt quite comfortable with that lower number. There was a question earlier, and I have been listening all along here, but I haven't, took me a while to figure out how to get in. The housing project is basically parking neutral. The intent was to, we took a close look at the footprint of the site, portion of the site that was being reserved for the future housing units. And the size of that footprint is intended to accommodate underground parking sufficient to accommodate the people living in the housing project there. So to that extent, it doesn't have a large impact on the ratios going forward because they're basically neutral. As a parking project goes forward, it's going to accommodate its own parking, but its footprint does reduce the parking available just by its own footprint, and that's where we landed at the 2.3. We're aware of other locations, that are experimenting with other parking ratios and so forth, and took those into consideration. I think if you were to benchmark what's being proposed here against some of the more forward-looking urban environments, it's still a fairly conservatively low parking ratio for this site. So that's a little bit of my own personal opinion, but it is based on a lot of years of experience of watching that site, watching it develop, kind of understanding what the needs are for that site and some of this other evidence with zoning codes and other benchmarks.
Thank you, Larry. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping to get some clarification from Mr. Barton on this. You mentioned that was sort of supposed to be neutral, but I mean, when I look at just that kind of primary matrix of parking ratios, I mean, that's where that huge jump happens from phase 2 to phase 3. And by the looks of it, the total square foot goes from 220,000 up to 272,000, 52,000 more square feet, I'm assuming, for the housing component. And the reduction in the surface stalls is there, but then there's no addition for the structured stalls that you're saying will be there. So it's not really neutral, and it seems to have a much higher impact than simply the loss of the surface stalls for the footprint of that phase 3.
Yeah, but I think it does. Once you get to that point, that's when it drops down to, I think at the end of the whole thing, even with Buick Street going through, that's where we landed at the lowest long-term parking ratio on site as being 2.3. And that's where we wanted to be at least slightly better than its current ratio of 1.9.
I understand that's how it's showing, but my question is so phase 2 shows total parking of 705 stalls on the entire site. That's 336 surface and 369 structured. That's serving 220,000 square feet. And that gives you a parking ratio of 3.2. And then in your phase 3, which the only difference is construction of the affordable housing component, which is going to lose some surface, create more square footage, and create some additional structured parking to serve that housing unit. You have the drop in the surface stalls, but you have no increase in the structured stalls. So your total parking actually goes down and your square footage goes up very significantly. And that's where you get your parking ratio dropping from 3.2 to 2.4. So it seems like you're not accounting for that parking that will be part of that. You're accounting for the additional square footage of that affordable housing project in your ratio calculations, but you're not accounting for the parking that, as you said earlier, will basically take care of itself.
Yeah, I'd have to double check whether we had added in some parking stalls for what would be underneath that building. And it might not be showing up as a separate itemized item. And when we say we lost so many stalls, it might be the balance of gaining some under the building and losing the surface stalls. But I would double check that for you.
Yeah, that would be good. Maybe as I mentioned to Matt Wachter, I mean, if you were able to just do a version that kind of extended that further, that might really help clarify things.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and we can double check that shortly after the meeting. I'll send out an email if that's an appropriate way to do it.
Sure. And I guess just to clarify, I mean, it sounds like you kind of said this in your comments, but I mean, I think you're kind of looking through all phases and then looking at what that end number, what kind of that lowest comfortable ratio that you would recommend, which is the 2.3 post Buick Street extension, and then basically kind of work backwards from that in terms of what was recommended with the structured.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? So we do have our public hearing coming up in 2 minutes. So if we can, we could get this item off the table. Are there any additional questions for staff or any of our presenters? Alder Foster?
Yeah, for Matt. So obviously this is, sort of things are already in the works. This was an ask of the council to kind of validate before we move forward with this, the big investment in the ramp. I had some questions tonight. Hopefully we'll get some more info in terms of locking in that final sizing of the ramp. How does that fit in the process, and how does a motion, approval of this relate to? I mean, is that it? Does that mean that this is how many parking stalls you expect to propose, and what? Yeah.
Sure. So if it goes to council and just gets kind of passed as is, we'd take this report, we would go out to find an architect, and even if we ask them to build 369 stalls, I'm sure that they come back and say, yep, that's not going to fit very well. It's going to be 352, or it's going to be, whatever that is. So that's certainly an option that you can just kind of pass it as is. If you have additional comments, if you think 369 is, not the right number, you think, it should be a range of 325 to 365. You can give us those comments. There's other things, like Tom had mentioned, like holding us to do the TDM measures or these kind of other things. We can do that, or you just give me the feedback, because I think we're going to do that anyways, to be honest. But yes, assuming that the report is passed, we're going to go find an architect to actually design it in more detail and get something close to 369, unless, of course, concrete prices go through the roof in the next 6 months and we have to value engineer a floor off the thing or something like that.
Yeah. So, I'm personally, I really want to get to yes with this. Like, I want to figure out what that right number is that we can agree on, make sure this progress, that this project moves forward. I feel like it's a really big and important decision, very expensive decision. And I'd really like to get those updated numbers. I'd really like to hear from Tom to do a little bit of a high level review of some other cities, and what are some target ratios that other cities have been working under. But I also know there's the timeline on this has been really tight, and et cetera. So what would be the way to be able to still get that information and try and give a confident recommendation without having some of the information here tonight? Well, I guess, what would you recommend?
It looks like Tom has his hand up, maybe is a better idea than what I'm going to say.
Go ahead, Tom. And if this is going to continue, we're going to have to postpone it because our public hearing needs to begin.
Yeah, I can do what Alder Foster requested. I do want to note that there was an attachment to this Legistar that stated that the spaces associated with Buick Street would not have to necessarily be constructed initially. And I think that was something that Matt had said that they'd be willing to do. So that would kind of lower the ratio, I think between 2 and 3 from 3.2 to 2.8. That's something that probably should just be considered in your discussion. I'm not endorsing or opposing, I'm just letting you know that that is something that Matt and his team had talked about post-report prior to this meeting.
Yep, and we can bring those additional points that you brought up to finance next week because we can have those answers by then. Absolutely, and if your concern is that we're going to get to those higher parking ratios at phase 2 and never kind of bring them back down, I think making commitments to get 3 and 4 done, phases 3 and 4 done sooner rather than later, especially that Buick Street extension, that sort of holds us from ever getting to a very high parking ratio because we take out a big chunk of parking lot sooner rather than later.
That's dependent on a future development from a private property owner for Cypress to be able to get any.
Well, we could do the extension that falls on our property and pull it back to the alley. So we could just cut Buick Street into 2 phases and do our phase, fast. Sure.
So I mean, I'm assuming it's postponing a recommendation from TPPB to our next meeting. What kind of problems would that cause where you're at?
Right. So after these contracts with Strang to sort of finish master plan in this, then we would just go into holding pattern before we could run, because we have to go through the whole public works process to get the architect and do all of that. So I don't know the exact tally of months, but we run into some weird times with committee schedules with, I think, August break. So certainly having action tonight is, I think, preferable to keep us moving on things. But I don't know the exact effect without looking at calendars for a few minutes.
Okay.
Senator Harrington McKinney?
Chair, I know that you're moving toward the public comment section. And so at this phase, I am not going to be voting to put this on pause with the staff presentation and the discussion and the follow-up that could be with finance that would, still give us some flexibility. I would hope that the body accepts this report so that we can really move forward rather than stalling this presentation. And so at whatever point the vote will be called for to accept this report, please indicate that so that we can be done with this back and forth discussion and have some finality in the approval of the proposal.
Thank you, Alder Foster.
Thank you. I'd like to move referral this item to our 8/16 meeting.
There's a motion. Is there a second? You need a second just to discuss it. You don't have to be in favor of it to second it. Okay, there's a motion, but there has not been a second. Is there another motion? Alder Harrington McKinney?
I move that we accept the report of this that's before us now.
There's a motion. Is there a second? It's like Alder Furman, second. Any discussion? Alder Harrington McKinney? Okay, so your hand up. All those in favor of accepting the parking study and final parking count determination for the Village on Park, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Roll call, please.
Roll call vote's been requested. Reva, if you would please call the roll.
All right. Bernadette McCullough. Harrington McKinney.
Aye.
Grant Foster.
No.
Keith Furman.
Aye.
Bergamini.
I, with a question afterwards for Tom.
Okay.
And
I have 3 ayes and 1 no. Is that correct? Okay, we need 5 ayes in order to pass the motion. This motion fails. Margaret, what was your question?
My question was whether we still have quorum with Badri not being here.
I believe that we do. We have 3 alders, yourself and myself. That's 5.
Okay.
And it requires 5 members in order to pass a motion, even if there are only 5 of us.
Okay. And the next is just a point of order, which is we're overdue to start the public hearing. Traditionally, we have always started public hearings on time and tabled whatever we were talking about at 6 p.m. So I would like us to do that.
Thank you, Margaret. Alder Foster.
I was just going to raise a point where I actually don't think we need, I think it's just a majority of those present, but I don't think we have anybody from the attorney's office to clarify, but I don't think we actually need 5 to pass that.
Okay, well, it was 3 ayes and 1 no. That can be clarified, of course, afterward. We will then move on to our public hearing for the Metro Fair study. Reva, you have a better sense of who's registered now because of the registration kind of mix up. If you would please call on registrants.
sure.
So I will open the public hearing. Speakers have 5 minutes at public hearings, which is 2 minutes longer than is typical for meetings. Reva will call on you, and then I will begin a timer. Go ahead, Reva.
All right. So the first person that we have up is Ruben Anthony. Let's see here. Actually, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Susan DeVos is up for to speak about the Metro Fair study. Sorry about that.
Chair, point of order. Would it be possible for us to have the presentation before taking public comment? I think that seems more appropriate so people can actually possibly have their questions answered and understand what's being discussed first.
Yes, I think that could be appropriate. That's probably why Justin's hand is up. Without objection, we can do that. Justin, go ahead.
All right. Thank you all. Let me share my screen. I've got a abbreviated version of the presentation that's been given previously. All right. So why we're here, we're talking about a change to our fare collection system for a couple different reasons. One, improving the customer experience and convenience of using the fare system, which is somewhat burdensome at the moment. To reduce some of our administrative costs. We're also, we're about halfway through the useful life of our equipment. That equipment is very expensive, so we want to make sure we have a comprehensive plan in place as we move towards a replacement of that system. And then rolling out a bus rapid transit line in which our current fare system doesn't really work. So we presented this to TPBB in June. Actually, I think that date may be wrong. We had we did back in earlier June, and then again in mid-June. We had a public information meeting 2 weeks ago. We're here tonight for a public hearing. We'll come back to the TPPB later this month or potentially at a later date to get a final direction and then move towards developing and releasing an RFP for the system, hopefully by the end of the year. And it'll take a couple of years to implement. So one piece, we did look in depth at a fare-free system and what that might look like for us. And that report is available and has been shared with all of you. The final summary is that it creates a funding gap of anywhere between $7 and $17 million. And because of that, we're not recommending that from a staff perspective. We're trying to seek other methods to reduce barriers that fares provide. But overall, the summary is that even if that funding were available, which we don't have a realistic path towards doing, it would be better spent enhancing service rather than going fare free. So with that, we looked at a couple different fare system types. Traditional fare box is what we use now. We also looked at a proof of payment system, which uses fare inspectors to roam the system, but it does have some concerns about profiling and is quite expensive administratively to implement. And so that led us to an account-based fare collection system. And I'll explain a little bit more about what this is, but essentially it's a tap card system that allows us to install a card reader at every door of all buses. So this will work for both BRT and local. And allows us to use all-door boarding, which speeds up the boarding process. Allows new techniques, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and then we can avoid some of those concerns about our proof of payment system. But the biggest challenge is around, I'm sorry, so this is a summary of what I just mentioned, but essentially this tap card reader would exist at every door. But the biggest challenge is cash collection. So those machines are small and they don't have a cash collection component. Right now, fewer than 10% of our boardings, actually closer to 5%, use cash on board. Most are boarding with a pass of some sort. But for those who don't have other options, this is a very important equity issue. And so as we go down this path, we want to make sure that we have mitigations in place that fully protect those folks towards the ultimate goal of eliminating cash on board, just because of its cost and complexity in doing so. And so what we're recommending here around cash collection is to create a half fare program for those who qualify for low income. That half fare program charges them half the regular fare, but it also allows a negative balance. So you can ride even if you don't have balance on your account, and true that up at a later date, obviously with some upper limit. Leverage a retail network in order to reload cards at many different locations throughout the city. Continue collecting cash on board for now on all of our local routes, but with the goal of demonstrating the benefits of this new account-based fare system, and hopefully seeing more and more uptake of it to the point where cash collection is a small fraction of all of our boardings. But then with BRT, moving in a direction of doing this tap card, but not rolling out with cash at the beginning. And then a handful of other things this account-based fare collection system enables. We can do fare capping. So basically, instead of selling individual passes, we can move to a model where we create a fare cap. So people pay $2 per ride up until they hit a certain threshold, and then every ride after that threshold is free. That cap is typically set at what the fare or the pass amount was. And so what that does is it allows people who couldn't afford to spend all the money up front for a monthly pass to still get the benefit of that. And so to create a situation where it's expensive to be poor by having to buy fares individually rather than the efficiency of a pass. And then also rolling in mobile payments with a custom app that allows your phone to mimic a fare card, allowing open payments with Apple Pay and Google Wallet, but not doing a mobile payment option for those whose phones do not have that capability. We integrate with other ID cards, like UW identification cards. We'd implement transfer periods to where we can, rather than having transfer tickets, we can just, any tap within 2 hours is free and considered a transfer. We can still issue single-use paper cards for social service organizations on a limited basis. We would be able to integrate and accept electronic fares on paratransit, which is currently cash only. And then still allow and open payments with those contactless credit cards as well. And then, so from here, we'll accept public comment, and then we'll move an action to a future meeting, and then move forward with our RFP. So that's, again, abbreviated version of what was previously presented here at TPPB, as well as a public information meeting.
Thank you, Justin. Ree, would you then proceed with calling on our registrants for public comment?
I have Susan DeVos.
All right, Susan, you got 5 minutes. You may go ahead when you're ready.
This testimony addresses the part of the proposal for new fare structure that fares only be paid in cashless form. From the outset on BRT lines and within 5 years on local lines. For a rider to be able to use cash-free tender is good, but the option of paying in cash should stay available in a welcoming community. Proposed ways to mitigate going cashless are problematic. In some, the proposal that Metro go cashless should be rejected. The policies of systems in Milwaukee, Chicago, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. provide examples of what could be done to be both account-based, enabling riders to go cash-free while keeping a cash option. Madison would do well to look at how other agencies have modernized their fare systems. There are many advantages of an account-based system, both for Metro and for customers. A recent Senate report presented to the Transportation Policy and Planning Board at the end of June discusses a option 2 all-door tap card boarding on all buses beginning on page 16. That option would enable the customer to set up an account online and add funds or replenish cards without making a separate trip to a sales outlet. Madison area bus advocates have been wanting to be able to use smart cards and now smartphones too forever, it seems, and considers this a welcome proposal indeed. The option would also enable all-door boarding, something else we have wanted to see for a long time, especially since it is a way to speed up buses without taking away bus stops. The problem is that option 2 is then combined with the additional option of going cashless. We are told that continuing the current cash policy would slow the bus, but we are not told what proportion of the current ridership even uses cash, or how much faster buses might go if that option were eliminated. Although we just learned 5 to 10%. Certainly use cash. Certainly slowing the bus was a popular argument against having bike racks on the front of buses or mainstreaming wheelchairs on regular buses, arguments that fortunately did not prevail. Another argument argument is that cash systems are expensive. However, we are not given an estimate for the net difference in the cost between what are called mitigations and just keeping a cash option. Furthermore, these mitigations focus on what is called transportation equity. Not only did the report not mention a number of important factors linked to transportation equity, such as the use of a bank account by victims of domestic abuse, but there are factors associated with being a welcoming community that are not strictly equity issues at all. I end by asking you to consider the following scenario. Imagine, if you must, not only that you have no bank account, but that you have no cash sitting around and have maxed out the permissible negative balance on your Metro account. The only way you are going to be able to travel is if someone gives you a ride or enough cash for a bus fare. Imagine that you go to a vending machine nearby, thereby telling people that you have some cash that you just told them you did not have, only to find out that the vending machine is broken. It eats your money but fails to issue you a ticket. Now, what do you do?
Thank you, Susan. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next speaker.
The next person we have up is John Becker.
All right, John, you've got 5 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, a history of efforts to date. We approached various municipalities, city and county both, about doing a fare free transit feasibility study in 2012 and subsequent years. In 2019, having failed to move the dial, we decided to raise money and do contract a study ourselves. We were asked by the potential contractor to provide a letter of support from the city to ensure that they would have cooperation in getting data necessary for such a study. We provided that to the mayor's office, and then everything went radio silent. For 6 months, we heard nothing until it was announced the city was doing their own feasibility study, probably using some of our work product. We would like to remind you tonight that all City of Madison employees already enjoy fare-free transit. Now, the Metro Staff Fare Options Report of 28 June 2021 reveals that the fare-free transit option should have been given fuller consideration. The most equitable option. It's based in research. It avoids problems that are inherent to cashless systems. It reduces fare problems of concern to persons who are disabled, including those with vision impairments. It is the least complicated of all systems for future and current riders, residential or visiting. And it enhances mode switching and decreases new rider anxiety. It eliminates technology staffing problems. It's most likely to increase ridership, in fact, a great deal. And it was this that was declining pre-pandemic on Metro and may be reduced going forward due to the COVID Delta variant. FFT would help essential workers and the local economy, even in that dreaded future drop in ridership again. Fare free would reduce the need for Metro administrative staffing, the cost of which since 2015 seems to have been increasing faster than ridership. The percentage of overall personal costs is not known, but Capital Times article indicates that it's risen a great deal, like 12%, as opposed to ridership falling. And we have 4 new managers being hired for the BRT, supposedly. Provides a greater Madison municipalities with an equity-sensitive tool for offsetting fast-rising housing costs by providing the opportunity to reduce overall household transportation costs. That's $9,000 per year average. That can be done more quickly by the city than providing housing stock. Other municipalities have extended their fare-free that was created during the pandemic. Why not pilot fare-free transit now? The city has appears to have $4.57 million in federal funding from CARES, CAAA, and ARPA, and other cities are using that money to extend fare free as their economies recover. You should delay the fare decision as long as possible to make sure the decision is in the best public interest. Why delay? An equity analysis must include the fare-free option. No media coverage of fare-free options has been given thus far, except to mention staff opposition. State Street plus Square route discussion has dominated the news. Federal infrastructure bill outcomes are unknown. The future and current state of Wisconsin transit aid cuts are a problem. COVID Delta variant is an impact on ridership. The USA standards for fare-free transit feasibility studies were delayed by a pandemic and are still in development. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine evaluation framework for fare-free transit public transportation is due out in June 22. Rising gas prices. The last time they rose to $5 per gallon, transit demand rose a great deal. Accelerating climate crisis indicates that decarbonization will need to be speeded up a lot, including transportation mode switch. So I ask again tonight, as I have been for several weeks, what is the latest possible date for fare collection RFP to be let? It appears it could be delayed until 2022 or even 2023. We need to revisit the fare-free transit feasibility study. It failed to mentioning the quadrupling in FFT systems in less than 20 years. This is in the new report released yesterday from the Transportation Resources Board. It reports that Chapel Hill Transit is considering an end to its FFT, but yesterday's TRB report contradicts that. It gives the impression that Metro's 25% share of total revenues is prohibitively high for mitigation, yet doesn't mention that LA Metro system has made a decision to go fare-free transit. It creates a false dilemma between service versus fare-free transit. Oddly concerned about increased ridership that usually comes with FFT. Does not identify the international standards for fare-free transit feasibility that were put to use in the study as requested.
John, that's time. Thank you. Reva, if you would please, are there any questions for our speaker? Reva, if you please move on to our next speaker. You're muted, Reva.
Sorry about that. Royce Williams is the next person. Sorry.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
All right, Royce, you've got 5 minutes. Go ahead when you're ready.
My name is Royce Williams. I'm a senior. I've lived in Madison over 55 years. And I'm certainly very interested in the senior pass. And that sounds like that it's a little vague now, but however, since all systems that get federal money must have to offer it, I assume it'll be there. I think transfers between the old and the new system are going to be a big problem here. And as long as the old system lasts, there's got to be a way of giving persons that transfer to another system. And I suspect the BRT is going to be a big part of that. It should be getting credit for what they've already paid. And I'm very unclear as to how that's going to be done. The thing on the past partnerships, that's going to be another big transition. And I kind of disagree that 5% of the fares are in cash. But not if you count the pass programs because I think if you add the past programs in, you're talking about maybe 85 to 90% of the total system now, because very few people pay cash. But there's going to have to be a transfer, and that's going to have to be done very carefully. And I'm not clear as to how you're going to adjust the rates for all these different past programs, because I think if I recall, the university is paying like $1.20 or $1.20 a pass. So that's a lot different than the $2 we've been paying. We're talking about. The other thing that's unclear is in the write-ups is what we're saying is people on past programs that you just look at the monthly cost and divide it out, and that'll be what the new fare is. But I guess one thing I want to point out is that the past programs were giving, well, they're basically giving a discount to frequent riders, and I don't know how you're going to deal with that. My comment on the rear door on the regular buses, I'm not sure. That's going to be a very difficult thing to enforce, and I'm not sure it's worth it on the 40-foot buses. The BRT buses, it would be a good thing, and hopefully you can find out some way of determining some of the fare invasion on the rear door, because it's going to be really hard for the operator to watch people coming in the front door and the back door. As far as reload.
Right, Royce, that's time. Thank you for your comments. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, Reva, if you'd please call on our next speaker.
There are no other speakers on this topic.
Okay, thank you. Questions for staff? I guess in the presentation. I guess I should formally close the public hearing. So I'm closing the public hearing. Are there any questions for Justin or any of our speakers? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, Justin. The comments around really needing to continue to accommodate cash. I know you're sensitive to some of the thoughts behind those comments. The proposal right now would not accept cash on BRT, would continue to accept it for potentially 5 years on local service with the goal of phasing that out. If the policy guidance was that we wanted to continue to accept cash, what would that look like? How would that modify the recommendation that you've put forward?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute button. So, in the short term, wouldn't affect us a whole lot. And so that's kind of, the way that we've structured this is, we'll continue to collect cash. we'll implement this new program that, even for those select few, relatively small number that currently use cash on board, hopefully the benefits of this new system would encourage them to move to this new system. And so the goal, what is now maybe 5% on board, if we can drive that down to 1% or 0.5%, then that makes it, much easier to make that transition. But if we decided not to kind of flirt with that goal to go to cash free on board, then yes, on the local buses, we would just continue to accept cash. And, the downside would be that we would have to purchase new cash collection equipment when our current equipment starts to fail. And those machines are, I can't remember the exact number, but certainly over $20,000 a piece. And so it would just be essentially, and then we would have to pay to, empty the machines and maintain the machines and all that. And essentially we are losing money on cash collection now. And so, but the BRT is probably the more challenging thing. And, whatever direction we go with BRT, we kind of need to scope that contract now to get those systems in place. And if the direction is to ensure that we accept cash for BRT, that means we need to put one of these kiosk machines at every BRT station. It would give a reload location for everyone. And that's not outside the realm of possibility. That's, fairly common. But they are expensive machines that are prone to failure. And so, we do have a lot of other systems across the country. Their number one customer complaint coming into the call center around BRT systems is the fare collection machine stopped working. And so that's what we're kind of trying to avoid, a reliance on those machines in this case. But certainly it is a possibility if that is the will that we guarantee that we'll continue to be able to collect cash at every station going forward.
And what, in terms of other cities that have BRT, do you have any kind of rough estimate of how many do not accept cash versus how many do?
So most BRT systems in the country go through they use that proof of payment system. And so to use the proof of payment system, you do have to have those machines at every single station. And so most do accept cash still. There are many systems that are, just as was mentioned, there are a lot of systems that are exploring fare free. There's also a lot of systems that are exploring cash free. And, I think Dayton is the latest example where they've officially moved in that direction. And so there's not a lot of examples out there that have gone completely cash free, but certainly a lot that are moving towards that direction.
And what's the rough cost if we were to get those machines added at all of the BRT stations? What would that cost?
So they're roughly $17,000 a piece for the kind of the low end model across 32 stations. I can't do that math right now, but in the over $1 million probably all in.
Yeah, and then just my last question: so a relatively small percentage of users that rely on cash, do we know anything about those users? And have we done anything in particular to outreach to them to ask about this proposal and to hear their feedback on it?
So the challenge is that we do not have a recent onboard survey that asked this question. And so we are planning to do another survey next year, and with the intent of asking this specific question of, what do you use to pay your fare? And so we'll have that option available to us. So again, that's why this is kind of being structured as we're establishing a goal of moving towards cash free. But if people don't start accepting this new system and continue to pay in cash, then I would expect we would revisit that and
not stop taking cash.
And would we be able to, let's say at our next meeting, we take a vote and give a recommendation of how to move forward? Could that include a recommendation for the system as you've proposed it, but still keep the door open for or postpone the decision around whether or not we include the cash accepting machines at the BRT stations until after we've gotten that feedback and until we're at the point where we need to get those installed, or do you need that decision at the same time?
I don't think that we could wait that long to make a decision on the purchase of the machines, but certainly going ahead and purchasing the machines does not preclude us from going cash free in the future. If the board is still apprehensive about moving in the cash free direction, I would suggest that we go ahead and plan to install those machines. And if through the survey process we determine that cash mitigation is easier than we thought, then at that point we could potentially not end up installing them. But I think just the lead time on those machines, we would probably need to place that or have that contract ready to go before we have the results from the survey.
I think that that covers all my questions. Thank you.
All right, Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, Justin, I think you answered my first question with your last comment, but just let me be sure. The question was whether you would have the survey results, the onboard survey results before the due date for responses to the RFB for equipment.
No, we would not expect to have that.
Okay, so would you be specifying then that people bid equipment that could handle cash? I'm confused.
Sorry, yeah, that's my fault. So essentially, in a scenario in which we've gone to, or we are planning to go cash free on the BRT, we would not need to put these machines at every station, and so we just wouldn't order all these machines. If there is a possibility that we do want to stay with cash for the BRT, then we would need to plan to install these machines. The machines themselves will pretty much all accept cash. There's not really a reason to buy them and install them if they don't accept cash.
Okay, but that's for the BRT. What about for the rest of the fleet?
For the rest of the fleet, we have the existing cash boxes, and we would just continue to use those. So in that case, instead of buying new equipment, we already have the equipment. We would just continue to use in a cash collection situation. However, that equipment at some point will not be maintainable anymore. And so at that point, we would have to purchase new equipment.
Okay, so that brings me to my next point of confusion. I thought that the RFP that we were proposing was for the fare box, the fare kiosks or the fare boxes on our regular bus fleet and for a system for the BRT at the same time.
Yeah, sorry. This is a nuance of my abbreviated presentation, but these new smart card tap card readers can exist alongside the existing fare boxes. So they would actually be mounted next to them. And they're a much smaller device, roughly the size of a tablet, that only can accept electronic payment and can't accept cash. And so if in a world in which we need to continue to collect cash, then both machines would need to exist side by side at the front of the bus.
And do you think that most of the companies that perhaps would respond to our RFB actually make equipment that is compatible with current GenFare equipment on our buses?
No. I would say nobody but GenFair would integrate with GenFair. And so we would have to have, it would be a separate parallel system in place, and the GenFair system would only be used to collect cash. They wouldn't actually integrate with each other.
Okay, and how about the software for, and part of this RFP is also for accounting purposes, correct, and planning purposes? The software and the middleware to do that, or no? Is that included in the other RFP?
Most of that is in the other system, the other RFP. There's, as you kind of alluded to, there's two separate technology RFPs that we're working on. So the fare collection stuff is mostly standalone, whereas almost everything else is in the other one.
Okay. Oh, yes, one last question for the moment. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many staff we are employing in the cash room to work in the cash room right now? What are our what would the labor saving be? That would be directly attributable to not collecting cash.
So I do not have that at my fingertips right now. That is in the detailed report that we shared in Legistar. But I think by recollection, it's a couple of FTEs that we would expect to save in a non-cash collection situation.
Okay, sorry, I didn't remember that from the report myself, but my recollection is also that we have 2 or 3. Perhaps Nick, I see Nick Roosh is here. Maybe Nick could answer that question. No.
I don't think I have that answer either. Sorry, Margaret.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
All right, any additional questions? Okay, any discussion? Further discussion, I should say, last call. All right, our next item is, go ahead, Alder Foster.
Yeah, to give some indication, so that we'll be asked to take a vote on this, I guess, at our next meeting, but everything sounds good with what was proposed to me, with this big question mark around the value of being able to accept cash on BRT. I like the concept of being able to continue to accept it on the local routes, introduce the new smart card system, and see if that plays out, that we see an even further reduction in cash fares because of that. It really works for almost everyone, but I guess I am a little bit worried about completely taking away the cash option, even on just BRT, starting on day one when that's opened up, without having had a good chance to really hear from folks that are most likely going to be in that position. So I don't know if there's any way to get any more information to help guide us on that decision, Justin, between now and our next meeting, but that's just where I'm at. I would certainly prefer not to spend the money on a system if it's hardly going to get used and if it's really not creating a lot of value. But I'm just very conscious of not wanting to create an inequity where we shouldn't be, and have folks that can't access the BRT. So anything you can think of to share with us at our next meeting might be helpful.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Margaret, go ahead.
Yes, just sorry to go back to sort of questions, but Justin, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that you said that currently our paratransit only accepts cash. And I just want to state that I know from personal experience that is not correct. There are passengers who are, for example, using university passes, and I don't know if we still have any kind of agency fares or whatnot, but I think that your point was that we don't have any equipment on those vehicles at all. So would your proposal be that we would be equipping those subcontractors' vehicles with their equipment to read tap passes, or what?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that clarification. You're absolutely right. What I intended to say is that you can't just use an account or a regular 10 ride pass when you use paratransit. It's either cash on board or some prepaid pass that you must buy in advance or have granted to you by another organization. But yes, another nice thing about these tap cards is that they can be read typically by most like tablets and smartphones. And so we would, what we envision is whatever device that the provider is using to develop an app that they can use to accept those payments going forward.
Okay.
But I do think cash collection on paratransit could certainly continue much in the way it does today. But I'll note that cash collection on paratransit right now is probably not terribly secure. Right, they hand over cash and then they just put it in a cash bag and slide it next to the seat. And so reducing the amount of cash that they're handling is certainly a benefit too.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mick.
Our finance manager, Jennifer Schiller, just texted me and she said that it's 2 part-time staff in the cash room that are in right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any further comments, questions, or discussion on this item? Okay, then our next item is also a Metro Fare study, Legistar 66671. Justin, is there anything additional?
No, I think that was a mix-up on the agenda, so they're duplicates.
All right. And if there are no questions or comments on that, well, did we have any registrants for public comment on that item? I guess is question, Riva. Because there may be, we have to accommodate that.
No, we do not. There's nobody registered to speak.
Okay. All right, then we will move on to, we dealt with number 5 already. Oh, and just a point of clarification. The 3 votes did pass that item when we voted earlier. Lost my agenda here. All right, then we will move on to Legistar 66674, adopting the traffic calming final report. So this is the same item that we had at our joint meeting about a week and a half ago, or I guess 2 weeks ago. Are there any additional questions or comments for Avian Kovic? I see Ann's on the call. She's got her hand up, so I'll let her go ahead. Go ahead, Ann.
Thanks, Tom. Actually, item 6 is just sort of a placeholder. The actual item is, I think, is number 8 on the most recent amended agenda, because item 6 doesn't have anything in its Legistar file. So the actual item is the more lengthy one down below that says adopting the Joint Transportation Commission and Transportation Policy and Planning Board, blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to clarify that. There was some confusion on the agenda. You're muted, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also having trouble with my mouse too, jumping around on me. Yeah, I see we have some duplication. Without objection, we'll just bundle these 2 items together because they are the same item. And I will just read it out as the Legistar item, or the item number 8, 66570, which is adopting the Joint Transportation Commission and Transportation Policy and Planning Board Traffic Calming Subcommittee final report, and all of the included priority recommendations, implementing the new Safe Streets Medicine program and terminating the existing neighborhood traffic management program. So all of this we did discuss at the joint meeting. Are there additional questions for Anne, or there are a few members of the subcommittee here on the call or at our meeting here tonight? If not, I would be looking for motions to adopt. Alder Foster?
I would move adoption.
Second, Margaret's hands up, or I think Margaret, okay. Any discussion? All the hands went up. Thank you. Any discussion? It's been spoken to many times. Alder Foster, did you want to speak to your motion? Okay. Any discussion? All right, then I will read it one more time. All those in favor of adopting the Joint Transportation Commission and Transportation Policy and Planning Board Traffic Calming Subcommittee final report and all the included priority recommendations, implementing the new Safe Streets Medicine program and terminating the existing neighborhood traffic management program, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. It appears to be unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Anne, for being on this call. As always, continuing to put a lot of effort into all of this. Great, then our last item for the evening, assuming I'm reading everything right and have the right version of this agenda, is the Legislar 66675, the DOT budget. I believe that will be Tom.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll give a brief review of the operating budget that we submitted, and I believe it was posted on the city website on Friday. I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint. A lot of numbers in this and figures. I apologize. I didn't want to post it prior to it being posted on the city website, or I was asked not to share it until it was public knowledge. The first slide has to do with the predicament that I think the city finds itself in every single year, in that our operating costs continue to increase, and yet the amount that we can collect from levy and property taxes is less than that. And so every year there is a gap. This year, the gap between the revenues and the costs was estimated at $18 million by city budget. And so then all general fund services were asked to propose a 5% reductions. And so how do I put it? I want to just say citywide, most divisions feel like they are understaffed and that they need to continue. And yet we're always asked to cut, and it's just so I just want to say that there are many things that we would like to do, but we also recognize this is a difficult decision, and this is a decision that the alders, the Common Council, will have to wrestle through, because it's really an exercise in priorities. The transportation budget is probably the simplest of all the budgets that we have within our department. Basically, this shows what we've requested, about $500,000. We have filled Dave Trowbridge's position, and with we filled it with a lower classification, so we've made room for about 4/10 of an engineer. So within our budget, we have everyone that we previously had. We underfilled Dave Trowbridge's position, and so we have a little bit of room for an engineer. How do we provide our 5% reduction is for us to charge 11% of our staff time towards capital projects. That's primarily BRT. If you think about the people within the Department of Transportation, which includes myself and Mike Chickabala, it's pretty easy for us to charge between us time towards the BRT project, which also has a federal match. Some of the supplemental requests that we've made for just the small support system within the Department of Transportation is one. There's a 0.6 engineer to assist with conceptual and preliminary design of transportation improvements. This will complement the available funding for FTA already within the DOT budget. Funding for this position could be obtained if 15% of staff time were charged to the capital projects, particularly BRT, and about another $12,000 was obtained from the general fund. We've also made a request for about a half-time code enforcer for the Transportation Demand Management Program Administration. This would only be filled if the TDM ordinance is enacted. We're working on that now that we have Philip Gritzmacher on staff to refine that. Of the 0.5 FTA code enforcer, the cost would be about $38,000, and perhaps up to $23,000 could be obtained from program fees. Again, we would only move forward with that if the ordinance passed. If we look at parking, here you can see the overall summary for parking budget. Again, perhaps this is the text is a little bit smaller than I'd like typically for a presentation, but you can look at this online and within Legistar. You can see that the charges for services in 2019 were about 13.5 million. In 2020 is 12.8. Notice that 2020, the actual was 4.4. 2021, the adopted was 6.8. So the request for 2022 is about 6.8. And then if you look under the other financing sources, you can see that there really were, prior to 2020, there really weren't significant other financing sources. In the 2021, 5.7, that basically came from the parking general fund. Same in the C2C represents cost to continue. So the 2022 cost to continue is again about 5.8. The request is about 6.8 for the 2022. Let me see. If we look at what are the major things, about 6.8 million in parking reserves will be used for 2022. The parking reserve fund is anticipated to be reduced by about 3 million by the end of 2022. Generally, the parking manager likes to have about 3/4 of a year of personnel costs in the bank so that she has it to pay the payroll. This is not 3/4 of a year, but it's still not zero. Note that the budget request includes funding for a lease facility for the parking and enforcement officers. In the whole scheme of things, that lease amount is quite modest. It's not, it's around $100,000 a year. So it's a very modest cost, but I just want you to know that it's there. Supplemental request includes an administrative clerk to provide customer service, especially for PEO operations, which includes like my car is not here anymore, or where did it get towed to, those types of things. Traffic engineering. I'm going to say that traffic engineering probably has to exercise the most muscles to reduce their budget. Here you can see their services. It's allocated from across 7 services. All of those services, I think we feel are important. The adopted budget for 2021 was 8.4. The request for 2022 is 8.6. That includes the transfer of crossing guards. Some of the reduction scenarios for traffic engineering include reduced electrical expenses of $120,000 due to the LED conversion. And so that's, I'm just going to say that's one of the painless cost saving measures that we're getting from previous actions from the council. You know, like the council decided to move forward with the LED conversion in a relatively aggressive manner. And by doing that, the reduction scenario, you know, we reap the benefits from the electricity. They also include eliminate printed bike maps, increase employee charge to capital projects. I think we could do a better job with some of our employees, making sure that they allocate their time appropriately if they're working on a capital project. Yang also suggests leaving the communications tech 1 position vacant. Reduce funding on an epoxy pavement marking contract, which is $120,000. You should probably just make note of that because in the past, the council and finance committee have just kind of evaluated that item. And then the other is reduce the seasonal funding for pavement markings, $75,000. So roughly about $200,000 of that reduction scenarios would be accomplished through reducing our pavement markings budget. And that's actually a hard area to reduce because we feel like there is value, safety value in that. But then if you remember the graphic in the very first slide, somehow we have, you know, the finance committee and the city council has to find $18 million, you know, and so that's within the purview of our policymakers to figure out how to do that. Traffic engineering does have some supplemental requests. One is an electrical operations supervisor, which I'll discuss a little bit later, and then a reclassification of the 60% bicycle registration coordinator to a full-time ped bike civil technician. And so basically this is taking, if any of you know John Ryder, it's taking his position and reclassifying it and making it a full-time position to help with some of our ped bike efforts. In relationship to the electrical operations supervisor, I'm just going to say, you know, Yang will frequently say that, I don't want to say frequently, he will let me know that there are holes in the staffing model that he has. And he created this chart when he submitted his budget. And I feel like it's pretty objective and it just kind of states the facilities that we maintain. Signalizing intersections, you know, are up 12%. I think the RRFBs are perhaps one of the more significant items. You know, we started at 15 and now we have 97. Speed display boards, again, up over 300%. And my presumption would be that will probably only increase. Cameras up 300%. Streetlight circuits, you know, up 10%. And then doing some of the administrative portions for Diggers Hotline. So that's that. Then if we look at Metro Transit, this one is perhaps a little bit, doesn't really show the full story. If you look at our intergovernmental revenues, the 2021 and 2022 basically include our CARES and Rescue Act funding, as well as the decrease in our state funding. And then if you look at our charges for services, which include basically fares, that includes some of our contracts that we have with our partners, which vary less with the reduction in ridership, as well as our fare box revenue. So if I go to the next slide, sorry, I keep on having to move my The reduction scenarios included instead of paying for an onboard survey with city funds, that we would use federal funds at 80%. So it'd be a $400,000 consultant services for an onboard service survey, and $320 would be paid by federal funds. The other is in reduced overtime costs. So what that means is that we would change our staffing model, our bus driver staffing model, in consultation with the union representatives. But also if we could capture and hire more bus drivers. Right now we have a critical bus driver shortage. And so having that bus driver shortage drives overtime. Key items, this assumes that, again, 75% of 2019 ridership in 2022. If we get less than that, then we might have to draw more from the CARES Act funding. It does include the 50% reduction in state funding, which is backfilled with the CARES, CR, SSA, and Rescue Act funds. That will impact future years. And so basically, I'm just going to say that the federal government was very cognizant of the challenges of transit, and we were receiving an allotment, and we've kind of programmed how that allotment will fill in our fare box revenues for the next several years. And by the state taking away half of our state allotment, it means that we have to use those CARES Act funds sooner than we had anticipated. It does include a reduction in fuel costs and overtime. I guess we were able to lock in a very favorable fuel contract before it went up. So that's very helpful for us. Supplemental requests, which are kind of, if you look in the website there, you have to kind of follow it through the program sheets. But Metro is requesting an additional data analyst position and an administrative assistant. And basically, those positions are reclassified from 3 bus cleaner positions, which we don't feel like we need. It does include supplemental funding for the Hanson Road site, which will include 1 custodian, 2 utility workers, as well as utility costs and heating and keeping Hanson Road lighted. So I think it's really a summary of our operating budget request. You may ask questions, and I will answer them if I can, and if I can't, I'll say I'll go back with you.
Thank you, Tom. Questions for Tom? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. DOT budget, you had allocation of capital projects as one of the ways to meet the target. And then in your supplemental request, you said we could also bump that up to 15% to help pay for turning that part-time position to a full-time. What have you done an analysis, and what do you think is the maximum that could appropriately be allocated towards capital projects?
Yeah, I think right now we probably are allocating more towards capital projects than 15%. However, if I were to take a longer term view, if we don't have VRT, we can't all of a sudden just kind of transfer 15 or 25% back to the general budget. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think I was trying to find a medium that was sustainable, if you know what I mean. I will network redesign, which is a capital project, and the VRT, more than 15% is probably being charged towards capital projects. But the sustainability of this would be, let's say if we had an engineer that started working on street projects, helping to come up with conceptual geometry and the like, how much of that person's time is able to be captured within the capital cost of, let's say, John Nolan Drive or Willard Avenue, for example. And I really don't know that at this time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there should be some capacity. I mean, it's hard to predict the future, but even something like the Complete Green Streets project, I think we funded that through capital as well. And so, even helping with a project like that could probably be allocated.
Yeah. And so that's perhaps a good example of how we have to, because right now, every dollar of the Complete Green Streets is being used for consultant costs. So that means that every hour of staff time is kind of being shouldered by the general fund. And so, and so that particular project, we don't have any room for staff time to be charged towards it. But when we propose future projects like that, we should consider a staff allocation as well as a consultant allocation. You see what I'm saying? And we did not do that with the Complete Green Streets.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea. I think with last year's budget, IT seemed to really step up their allocations to capital projects, and it seems like there probably should be. I mean, just because it's such capital heavy work, it seems like there probably is a good opportunity to keep going that route in the future. The head bike civil technician, did you have any more info on what the thoughts of that position would do?
No, that was actually a request of Yang and Renee. I think the idea was to take kind of what John Ryder brought to the table, because he did bring some of these geometric ideas to the table, and then maybe double it. Do you know what I mean? Right now, Renee, she doesn't get into CAD. She doesn't draw things. And so I think the idea would be to provide that kind of support.
And then my last question, we've got money in the capital budget for Vision Zero projects again next year. And I know we're still in the kind of early draft phases of the action plan, but has there been any discussion around potential operating needs for that program moving forward?
There hasn't. I will say that many communities that have a Vision Zero program have a full-time operating cost director, and we don't. We've kind of absorbed that within our staff because we feel like safety is core to the mission of the DOT. That being said, perhaps we submitted our Vision Zero capital projects as well as 20 is Plenty and all that, and we are unsure of how many of those will be put forward.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, we can talk a bit more offline, but it'd be good to think about what we'll really need from a staffing perspective to really keep that work moving forward, especially if it continues to be supported by the council and accelerated, and more and more stuff we're trying to do to improve safety. Just figure out where that fits in the staffing mix as well. Thank you.
Okay. Alder Harrington McKinney, please go ahead. You're muted, Alder.
Thank you. Tom, as you further explore these possibilities, I would hope that you would come back to this body, because as we're looking at staffing, as we're looking at budgets, it is really important that we all have that kind of information and how we're going to be funding this and how it's going to impact budgets going into the future. And so when you find that sweet spot, or when you find those options, please bring it back before this body so that we can consider it as well.
Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, a quick question about the additional staffing requests, just so that I am sure I understand. For example, there was I think a half-time position for the TDM person, and I'm assuming that the estimate of the cost did not include benefits. It was simply wages. Is that the case? And is that how the city does its budgeting? I'm sorry that I forget this, but I'm not an alder, so.
Yeah, so actually, I tried to prorate the benefits within there. So it was meant to be in there. So this position is not necessarily to create the TDM program, because that's very, I'm going to say that's a higher level policy type of thinking. But this is more like, here are our requirements, and has this development met our requirements? And so it's meant to be a more administrative position, and it's I took it pretty much right from the building inspection classifications, because it's not dissimilar to that. You know, you have a set of basically policies and requirements, and does this development meet those policies and requirements? And so that's what that is based on.
Another question about staffing. The communications position in streets, I believe, that is recommended to be discontinued. Can you talk a bit about what that position entails currently?
I guess in streets or engineering?
TE.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that one, for a second, I thought we were talking about a public information officer, and I thought, really? I did. Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with right now, traffic engineering services the radio communications for all of the city agencies, as well as other communities around here, and enforcement officers. And so that includes monitoring the radio tower and that equipment, as well as installing equipment within cars, such as sheriff's cars and police cars and the like. And recently the council approved kind of a contract with Motorola that kind of frees up some of those maintenance responsibilities, because it's more of a subscription-based service rather than a capital-based service. And so it was Yang's thought that we did not need the full number of technicians that currently are at the fleet services building. He did not want to eliminate the position, you know, because I think he just wants to test out what would it mean if we did not fill that position for a year or two.
So that position's currently vacant?
Yeah, there was recently there's been at least two that I know of, people that have left our kind of communications group, and so they're reshuffling the staffing model for that right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further questions for Tom? Comments? But seeing none, that's all we have for the evening. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Margaret, second by Alder Furman. All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.